Hi, everyone, and welcome to this LLLWeek event hosted by Obesu on the topic of well-being and assessment. And our main question for today is, how can we make schools stress-free? And this is a question that has popped over and over again in the last 2 years. Everyone really in the environment has tried to answer this question in different ways, coming up with recommendations, with guidelines, with best practices. Us ourselves at Obesu have put together a sort of resources. We have investigated the topic at length. And before I go a little bit more into it, for those who don't know, Obesu is the organizing bureau of European school student unions, and it is the European platform for cooperation between the national school student unions that are active in secondary education, general and vocational. It puts together over 30 member candidate and affiliate organizations that have to fit some criteria, the most important criteria being that they are independent and democratic and national. And as the sort of European focal point for all the school student union, when the COVID-19 pandemic started, it was really crucial for us to find ways to be in touch with our membership and to see how the pandemic has affected them, of course, and had affected them in different ways. And for this, we put together a research project, an inquiry, that sought really to amplify the voices of school students, focusing on different points, the education and the instruction they received, its content, modalities, but also their well-being, the students' well-being, and their views on the actions to take to build back better. And the findings informing the analysis were collected through a 6-month inquiry of mixed qualitative methods. We reached out to over 1,000 students and teachers from different European countries that were recruited through our networks. And the data gathered, the data gathering that we put together was conducted more or less a year after the first closures, between March and April 2021. And that was a time when really it was starting to become obvious that the crisis was not going to just stop at some point, but it was just going to sort of fluctuate. And reopenings were not going to last forever, and infection rates really much determine how school systems respond to the crisis. And so after this sort of initial shock, we wanted to investigate the extent to which some long-term solutions and lessons learned were operationalized, and with what results in the different European countries in our study. And obviously, the report is available on our website. It is pretty thorough. There's over 50 pages of data regarding all these different areas that I earlier touched upon. The overall sort of final findings is that the impact of the pandemic was really very heavy, disproportionate, and in some ways, it was really much dependent on past neglect, and more specifically on a sort of the accumulating cuts to welfare systems all over Europe, really made it so that different countries had different outcomes, and within the countries there were also different outcomes based on things such as infrastructure, preparedness, and digitalization, and resources, including human resources. And as it always happens, when you finish a research project that I curated together with a task force, a student from our member organizations, as it happens very, very often, when one conducts research, it's really difficult to put a stop to the, to the inquiry, like when do we stop investigating? And in that sense, the fact that we published a report in September only raised more questions for us in terms of how to tackle certain topics and how to find solutions to some of the most relevant issues that were raised. And in this sense, well-being and assessment is a big one, is really a key for us in sort of finding the way forward for education systems. And this is also the reason why we have organized with this event. We had gathered the input of over 1,000 students. We had discussions, focus groups, also within our member organizations, and most recently at our Council of Members that was just last weekend. We just kept unpacking these issues and really making sure that students from really all walks of life and all the countries in our organization could have their say. And now that we have all this student input, we also would like to expand a little bit more the discussion, having different stakeholders also having their say. And in this sense, this panel really wants to be a sort of, it is a fishbowl, but also like a sort of a thinking tank of ideas. What are the steps forward? What are the main priorities? How do we address some of the challenges that were raised? And before I introduce our keynote for the event, I'd just like to say a few things also on what were the findings from our research in regards to mental health and assessments. In regards to, there's definitely first of all, there's definitely a connection between the two. So definitely students recognize that their mental health was impacted by the uncertainty of assessment, by the huge workload that they've been subjected to in online learning, but also the opposite, that the students' mental health with lockdowns, with the stress of living through the pandemic, really in many cases affected the way in which students performed in the exams. And this in turn impacted on their future opportunities. When it comes to what the students would like to see, we have some student representatives present today, so I really hope that they themselves, can, of course, say a little bit more about their views and opinions. But I think that the main point that came out really is that there's an urgent need for reform in the way that assessments are conducted in most of the EU member states, and the issues that students have raised have to do with two main barriers to sort of excelling and success in exams. And one of them is a more general societal barrier, the idea that not all students come to the exam with the same opportunities because of their social background, because of their parents' occupation, because of their access, especially in digital learning, to devices and tools for the digital classroom, but also on a more sort of general and wide level to the fact that assessment methodology really failed sometimes to take into account the diversity in the way that students learn. And especially in our Council of Members, what really came out that the students are really, really passionate about learning, and that sometimes the way that we assess them can really have a negative impact on the students' willingness to learn, the students' motivation. And so obviously these are all sort of reasons, the more reasons to have these discussions with experts coming from different fields. And this is what we're here to do today. And for more sort of insights on how well-being assessment and student activism are connected, I am really pleased to introduce our keynote speaker for this session, Milos Stankovic. Milos is a psychologist and therapist in training. He just finished a master program in democracy and human rights with a thesis focusing on the right to mental health in Serbia and Montenegro. Milo was a former employee of Obesu and also the coordinator of the working group on mental health. At the moment, Milos volunteers in different European youth organizations and work in the field of mental health, delivering trainings and coordinating the work of various working groups on the topic. So welcome, Milos. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Gilda, and thank you, Obesu and LLP for inviting me to this event. Yes, as you mentioned, I got the task, which is sounding nice, but it's actually not easy to be a keynote speaker. So I think, or at least I hope, that my presentation will use as a material for discussion. It's definitely not going to cover everything because these two topics, assessment and well-being, are huge. And I'm sure we can have the whole week of discussions. But anyhow, here is an attempt. I'll share my screen and then we can start. I hope you can see it. So, good, thank you, Pina. I see you nodding. As Gilda mentioned, I was and I am still working a lot in non-formal education. So next slide won't be a surprise. So before we start, it's time to go back to school. I imagine for some of us it's earlier in the past, and for some it's later. But anyhow, I would like to invite you to use the chat option if you can, and to tell me what kind of assessment were your teachers in secondary school using to evaluate your knowledge, skills, competencies. So if you can just write 2 or 3 keywords, or even one is enough. So the question again is, what kind of assessment were your teachers in secondary school using to assess your knowledge, skills, competencies? I just need to find the option to see the chat again. Or if you still go to school, because I heard that we have a member organization of Obesu, what methods are your teachers using nowadays? End of year national exam? Mix of formative and summative assessment, many tests, big exam at the end of the final year, exams, orals, tests, exams, and more exams. Math exams, which nobody likes, at least me not. I didn't. PV presentations, 3 tests, exams, yeah. I think we all agree you can skip project-based assessments. Nice. I mean, you can keep writing. I will just also launch a second question because we have limited time and I would like to keep more time for discussion than for me spending time. When you will get, as a result of any of the tasks that you had, either exam or a presentation, how did you feel when you got a low grade or lowest grade? If it's 1 to 5, how did you feel when you got 1 or 2? Or if it's from 5 to 10, how did you feel when you got 5 or 6? If you can remember. If it was not too much in too long time in the past, like a failure, frustrated, like I was stupid or my effort was not seen, used to it, that I didn't do anything, that I wasn't good enough. Frightened to come home and tell my parents. Oh yeah, know the feeling. Disappointed in myself, anxious, overwhelmed, because you need to work more to get the grade up. Perfect. I mean, not perfect that you felt bad, of course, but perfect. Thank you for your responses. So yeah, I decided to put these 2 questions so we all get reminded and start thinking about how are assessment and well-being connected, and is assessment affecting well-being or is well-being affecting assessment? I'm not gonna, sorry, I'm not gonna give a reply to this question nowadays, but I'm just gonna present some findings that are both coming from psychology, because as Gilda said, I'm a psychologist, but also found some interesting material that are more on a policy level, and that can maybe be helpful for formulating recommendations or for as a base for the discussion. So as some of you mentioned in the chat, we have a difference between formative and summative assessment, where formative is the one for learning and takes place on day-to-day basis, allows teachers and students to know what they know, what they should focus more, and usually begins with a diagnostic assessment or establishing a baseline on what student or person studying knows. And from what we saw in the chat, this is not really a widespread approach in Europe or wherever we are based. On the other side, we have a summative assessment or the assessment of learning, which happens over a certain period of time, which can be a semester or after a certain unit is finished or whenever the teacher or the person leading the course decides. And that's more related to the learning aims and the relevant national standards. This is a description, so it might not be clear, but when you see the examples, you can see what's the difference between these two approaches. So in formative, we have in-class discussions, we have clicker questions where students can reply at the same time. We have some quizzes, writing assignments, homework assignments, and surveys. And from what I saw in the chat, not many of us were able to use these techniques or to use these tools to assess our knowledge. On the contrary, more of us, or most of us, had standard day tests, final exams, essays, presentations, and the final grades, which at the end of the year tell you, okay, you have 7 out of 10. But what does that mean? What does 7 mean? Is that really reflecting how much I know, or was I just not lucky or not lucky with the questions I got in the exam? Maybe those were the lessons that I precisely learned, or maybe those were the lessons that I didn't have time to learn, and then I don't think my grade is an objective reflection of what I know or don't know. However, as we say, the course grades are usually the most often used tool to evaluate the knowledge, and they're also in scientific literature most used indicator of academic performance, and at the same time primary academic concern, but not only for students but also for their parents and educators. And of course, in many countries, based on your course grades, you can choose or not choose which post-secondary education level are you going to go to, or which faculty or university are you able to choose. Because if you have low grades, you can go to the worst one. If you have better grades, you can go to the better one. And also, research shows that higher education attainment is predicting higher income and better physical and mental health later in life. So this already shows us in the beginning that course grades are actually very much connected to the mental health and to how we feel in our life. Because OBESO has so many member states, I tried to find as many examples as possible to confirm these findings. And for example, in Spain, a research which was done showed that these depression scores were negatively correlated with lower grades. When we speak about correlation, it's important to know that we don't speak about cause and consequences. Correlation just shows that there is a connection between two things that we measure. So in this case, students who have higher scores of depression have the lower grades. And then we can discuss what's the cause. Are the grades cause of depression, or is the depression causing the low grades? And also, if we, in the same research, they were using regression, which means that they were trying to see can certain characteristics predict or certain variables predict the other ones. And they discovered that the higher depression scores are associated with lower grades, which is similar to the finding I just presented. But higher anxiety scores were associated with higher grades. And in simple language, that means that students who want to achieve better or who have higher grades need to invest more effort, and that usually comes with a higher anxiety and with a higher stress, which we are trying not to have in the school. In Finland, there was research which shows that higher scoring on behavioral problems was related to the overall academic performance and to poorer future academic plans. Again, we can here discuss what's the cost, what's the consequence, but once again, and in another context, in a Nordic country, we can see that there is a connection or correlation between these two notions. And then in USA, even though it goes out of scope of Europe, we saw that, or we can see that adolescents with mental health problems are more likely to have poor grades, to use drug and alcohol, to engage in sexual activity. And why this study is important is because it highlights the need of screening youth who have different needs and to refer them to appropriate services, which is something that the schools should do. And then 2020 and 21 came, and the one who must not be named returned and affected the education system again. This time it's not Lord Voldemort, but COVID-19. So how did COVID affect the assessment and monitoring of learning during the crisis? There was a great, or there is a great guidance that was published by UNICEF in April previous year, and that speaks exactly about assessing and monitoring learning during the COVID-19 crisis. So I decided to use it as a material, and the guidance, first of all, that identifies several challenges. The first one is for students to maintain achievement and develop skills. When we speak about digital learning or online learning or any kind of learning that is not physically happening in school, it requires or it presupposes that the students have the self-learning and self-motivation, autonomy, and that they are able to do. Unfortunately, for some children, that is not true, especially for the younger one, because that is another competence that needs to be developed through education. And some countries had a lot of TV teaching or radio teaching or any kind of unidirectional one, which didn't give opportunities to students to get feedback from their teachers, so they cannot know at which level or at which stage in education they are, and what they can improve or what they know or what they don't know. Also, another important topic when we speak about assessment are the end of cycle qualifications. So because of all the school closures and all the prohibitions on physical gatherings, we had interference with national summative processes. So all those final exams, or however we call them in the national countries, and that was causing a lot of stress, reduced motivation, impact on academic profession, and that was especially important for the children who come from disadvantaged communities, because they're already at the risk of not completing their education. I have a few more slides, so I think I'll be on time, but please bear with me. When we speak about schools, of course, it's not only students, even though OBESU is a student organization, but we believe, or I speak we as if I still work for OBESU, but OBESU believes that teachers and parents are also equally important. So for teachers, it was also not an easy period because of the rapidly changing practices. So the teachers had to adapt to online teaching, and they had to develop a new ways of assessing, new ways of teaching. Some of them were lacking digital skills, so how to use Zoom, how to use Microsoft Teams, how to prepare a PowerPoint presentation. So those skills are not something that is automatically required from the teacher. And another experience or another thing that will happen in the future once we are back to school is that how are we going to assess what we learned in these 2 years, or how many years the COVID will last. So what tools and mechanisms we are going to use to assess what was learned in the COVID crisis. Challenges for schools are major shifts in the assessment culture. So we are no longer using test exams, but we have to use different kind of material. And the schools will, once we come back to schools physically, the schools will have to boost the learning of the ones who fell behind, or to find a way to make up for all the learning that didn't happen. And also on the level of systems and policymakers, the ministries have to adapt, postpone, cancel the standard assessment programs, but at the same time, they have to measure the reach and the coverage of distance learning and see if those 2 years are going to be lost or some learning indeed happened. To end up the presentation and also this guidance report of UNICEF, there are several recommendations. The first one is to monitor learning through the crisis. So to estimate the reach, access, and the use of distance materials. And in most of the cases, that's going to be based on the perception of parents, students, teachers. So is the perception really the reality? That's going to be the question, but at least we can start by analyzing the perceptions of people. Then to keep the stake of assessments low, meaning that all those exams that decide which university you can enroll or have you passed year or not should be avoided, and that all the assessments and all the teaching should reflect the crisis conditions. And also we cannot expect that students learn to the same scope and the same breadth as they do when they're physically together. And of course, we need to prioritize formative assessment. And I think the crisis of COVID is giving us perfect opportunity to start the switch from summative to formative assessment, and or to at least use it more in the schools, because as I said in the beginning, if you get 7 out of 10, that's not telling you a lot what you learned or haven't learned in a year. Of course, as we have different stakeholders in schools, as teachers and parents, we need to provide the teachers with some digital and assessment competencies, which they can use both online and offline, but also we need to inform parents and get them used to new systems. And a good way for that is parenting education and counseling. If we speak about equity, that's also crucial when we decide about which alternative assessment methods we use, because we cannot forget that a lot of children still don't have access to computers, devices, internet. We also have children with disabilities who might not be, or to less extent, able to use the ICT tools. And also fairness. Who knows, can teacher really know, is the student doing the exam, or maybe his older brother or a parent? So that way we can get the grades that are not really reflecting knowledge, and then the question of fairness comes. And finally, we need to ensure quality in the temporary assessment methods. So it means that all the channels that we any adaptations or alternations that we use to assess the knowledge need to be checked for quality and for equity, and that way we can ensure that also the teaching itself and the learning process was good, but also that the assessment on the other side is really reflecting and measuring what it was supposed to measure. I hope I was staying in 15 minutes, and I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Milos, for this very insightful and also interactive presentation and keynote. I think a lot of the things that you mentioned and Gilda mentioned, and let me here take my hat as the president of the Lifelong Learning Platform, are also reflected in the newest position paper that has been launched yesterday during the launch event of the LLLWeek, which is called Rethinking Assessment, Prioritizing Learners' Wellbeing, where many of these things are tackled, including, for example, a shift towards a more formative assessment methods, but also rethinking how we can include digital technology in new evaluation, many more things. It's a very interesting report with, again, policy recommendations that I suppose can be interesting for those of you who are interested in this topic, which I believe is everyone who is at this at today's event. And so without further ado, but just wanting to mention the position paper, and maybe if someone from the LLP Secretariat could share the link so it's easily accessible, but you can also find it on the Lifelong Learning's platform's website. I would like to then start introducing our panel discussion, which is going to be a fishbowl discussion. I'm going to explain how it will work in a second. So first of all, we have with us Amy Quickfall from the Association for Teacher Education in Europe and an expert in teacher well-being. Hello, Amy. Welcome. We have staying with us Milos, whom we already know. We have Francesca. I'm trying to find the people so that I can spotlight them for everyone. Francesca Gottschalk from the OECD, analyst at the Directorate for Education and Skills. Hello and welcome. And we have Alexandra Seibal from the board of OBESU. How do I find her? I found her. Wait a second. Okay, voila. And now we have our I'm going to add myself in the spotlight so that everybody can see all of us. So before I give you the floor, I just wanted to quickly explain to the rest of the people involved how we would like to proceed with this fishbowl discussion. So we're going to put out some statements, and some of these are provocative, but we just want to put it out there for everybody to think about it. And then we would like to ask the panelists to react in a minute, more or less, on each statement. I know it's challenging to stay within a minute, but we will elaborate as we go through with the several statements. And I will be timing, so I will be showing my screen when the time is running out, so you can see. And this is why I spotlighted myself, so you cannot avoid it. And then I would like also the rest of the participants that are today with us to also react to the statements. So let us try. Do you know how to use Zoom reactions? If you know how to use Zoom reactions, use Zoom reactions. So, so they are in the bottom part of Zoom. Hello, very nice. Many reactions coming up, so you can click on reactions and use it. We're going to ask you to use the tick, so the green when you agree, and the X, so the red one when you disagree. So I'm going to now try a statement and we see. So let's see. I think porridge is the best breakfast a person can have. Not so many porridge fans so far. Oh no, there's someone who is disgusted by porridge. Okay, very nice. So how it would work in this case is that I would give the floor to people in the panel that are already spotlighted to react and elaborate. For example, Milos, why do you think porridge is not the best breakfast ever?
Because I'm born in Serbia and we're used to eat salty breakfast with a lot of cheese and other things.
Thank you very much. And Francesca, why do you think porridge is the best breakfast ever?
Because you can pair it with almost anything and everything that I love, like peanut butter, almond butter, blueberries. So that's why I think it's the best.
Perfect. And then, for example, Marta, she said no. So if Marta wants to say something, she could say, I want to be part of the panel and I want to say why I think porridge is not the best breakfast ever. And so what would happen, Marta, I'm going to do something to you that I hope you don't mind. I'm going to add Marta to the spotlight, and Marta can also tell us why she doesn't think that porridge is the best breakfast ever. So
yeah, maybe the same as Milos. I just it's not a common thing at all in Spain, and I've tried it a couple of times. It's just like mushy and just not for me.
It is mushy, but this was a good example of a controversial statement. And so now that Marta also contributed, I'm going to send Marta away from the spotlight. Bye, Marta. Thank you for contributing. And in the next question, someone else will be able to come. If we are good on time, we can take more than one contributor. Is it clear for everyone how these reactions work and how these would work? Happy to see some reactions with thumbs up. Fantastic. So let us start with the first statement. And I'm going to ask you to really come in as you wish. If you want, I can call you in, but you can also just turn your microphone on and share your first gut reaction. So my first statement for everyone is: exams are a great way to assess students' knowledge, skills, and competencies.
I don't mind jumping in. Across the OECD, in most OECD countries, summative assessment and reporting are important at key stages of schooling. However, as Milos touched upon, in order to be truly effective, assessments also need to be formative, and in the sense that they allow teachers to identify and respond to student learning needs. So a formative assessment will involve teachers making frequent and interactive assessments of student learning at different points of the school year, and it allows teachers to react and adjust according to individual student needs to better help all students. And what's interesting is that when we're talking about student agency and student voice, is that this gives students the ability to be more actively involved in the process, and they can learn, or they can build on their learning to learn skills.
Thank you, Francesca. Anyone else from the panel would like to react on this statement? Maybe Alexandra. Go ahead, Alex.
So for me, it's not like that I would abolish exams totally, but I think that they have put a high pressure on school students, especially now during the pandemic. It was the only feedback from school students to the teachers. And I also made the experiences that you put so much pressure and you like, if that determines your grade, it's also like the only thing, it's really bad. But then we also have to talk about how grades affect the mental health of school students in general. So I think writing exams is not the problem, but that they make your grade, and maybe also fail your school student career is what is the issue. And I also had like this, when I was back in my local school student union with this campaign, this school system makes sick. And I don't like, it's a very provocative statement, but I think somehow it's true.
Thank you, Alex. Amy, can we hear your opinion on this?
Yeah, I kind of want to click the yes and the no for this one. Coming from my perspective on teacher wellbeing and workload, which is what most of my research is on. In England over the pandemic, we've had issues with exams not going ahead for key year groups, and teachers have done teacher assessment instead, which has been incredibly work intensive. And has really hit teacher wellbeing and workload. So I think exams can be incredibly useful in cutting some of that workload. And when it goes wrong, and we have to find an alternative, I think if it can be done, I think there are some great ways of doing formative assessment, which can be kinder to the students. It needs to be really carefully thought out when you're going to replace an exam, because often the knock-on effect is that teachers suffer and are expected to just find a way of managing the workload themselves.
No, yesterday, before I give the floor to Milos, we heard a presentation from Michael O'Leary from Ireland, and he was telling us how changing the Leaving certificate in Ireland, which is a very structured, very old school exam, into something very different, put an incredible pressure on teachers. And so there is a very controversial debate on what happened. So if you're interested in that, I think later on you'll be able to access recordings of the sessions. But it was a very interesting presentation about this issue of exams and also how it impacts teachers themselves, because sometimes we don't reflect on this enough. Milos, I'm going to give you the floor, and then I'm going to spotlight Nathan, who raised his hand so that he can contribute. Voila, Milos, floor is yours.
Well, I presented some evidence and some research, but I'm going to give a personal example. When I was studying psychology, we had the grades from 5 to 10, and whenever I went to written exam, I always got 6 or 7. But when I got to the oral one, I always got 10. So, and that was usually in the 1 week time difference or even a few days. So that shows that exams are not always measuring your knowledge, and in oral exam you can always show more, and a professor can see that you connect the knowledge and that you know different units, whereas in a written exam you just have luck, or you don't have luck with some specific questions. So I think exams, and I agree with all that is said, exams can be a good tool, but I don't think they're the best tool to measure the knowledge, and also they're not always the easiest to prepare for teachers, and I agree that it puts a lot of workload on them.
Thank you, Milos. Nathan, welcome to the panel.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Nathan from the French National High School Students Union, MNL, and I really agree about what has been said about the fact that exams put too much pressure on students, and I think we can understand it because exams are a bit circularized by school system, and maybe we can try to think differently, like those assessments that exams permit can be made with different type, like having punctual exams and not only final exams that will circularize and really important, and that put a lot of pressure on students all over the year.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for your contribution. I'm going to now kick you out of the panel, but you can come back at any time. So we will try to have someone else also. So how is it going so far? Is it clear? Is it okay to contribute in a minute? Is it too little? Just trying to make a formative feedback here before it's too late. I hope it's fine. Perfect. Okay. So my second statement for everyone in the panel is standard assessment methodologies are fit for remote learning. I can see some nodding. What do the rest of the people think also? People that are, oh wow, there seems to be some sort of a consensus so far. Would like to maybe, is there anyone who believes that, Francesca?
Oh, sorry, were you going to say, does anybody believe that they're fit for remote learning? Because I was going to say probably no. And we actually saw during the pandemic a survey of 84 countries. And I'm just looking at my notes, 58 countries had postponed or rescheduled exams, 23 used alternative methods, such as online or home-based testing, 22 maintained exams, while 11 countries, as was mentioned before, a few countries canceled exams altogether. So I think that shows that traditional methods were not reactive enough, or we weren't able to pivot in a way to maintain those in a remote environment. And I think even when talking about things, not just exams, but talking about formative assessment, this is also really dependent on students' physical presence in the classroom, which obviously presented a huge challenge during school. It didn't necessarily allow teachers to give feedback in a synchronous way as they normally would be able to. And then just moving, like thinking in the future, if we are in a case where exams to some extent need to be held in a virtual environment, we really need to think through how we can work through things like authenticating student identity, working through data privacy, encryption. Resources are restricted to ensure that test takers don't access unauthorized materials. So this can be done using both synchronous and asynchronous methods, which actually could provide some opportunities for education systems. The fact that we don't need to necessarily do things in real time, but to think through before exams can be fully taken in a digital environment.
Thank you very much, Francesca, for this contribution. So far, there is still no one who says, who would like to, who believes that they are fit. Still, if anybody wants to come on the panel, please raise your hand in the meantime and we will put you in. Does anybody else want to contribute on this point or on what Francesca just also elaborated on?
I just wanted a short thing. Standard assessment methodologies are made for physical testing in a classroom with all the other students. So if we have a new reality, I don't like to call it new normality because nothing about nowadays is normal. And we in psychology, we avoid using term normal. If we have a new reality, then the standardization should be re-standardized and made for the online setting. We cannot expect the tests that are made pen paper can work in online format. Simple as that.
Thank you, Milos. And I'm loving the use of reactions. The yes, the applause is very good. Very appreciative of this. Amy or Alex, do you want to contribute on this topic? Or Nathan, as you just joined our esteemed panelists.
Hey, I really agree with what Milos said, and I would add that more than it doesn't fit, it also creates a lot of inequalities because we have different equal opportunity for from exams or assessments because working conditions at home are really different for everyone. By example, some people have parents that can help them with assessments or exams at home because they can be teachers or anything, and there are other students that when they come back at home they have to carry out the preparing food for their brothers and sisters and dealing with all home problems. So there is I think a lot of inequalities more than the fact it doesn't fit from standard assessments.
Thank you, Nathan, for your contribution. I've also seen again some reactions of people agreeing, and I think this bridges very, oops, sorry, my timer for the minute. This bridges very well to my next statement. So I'm going to move there, and then we can also mix them up a bit. So the next statement that I would like everyone to comment on is, all students have the same opportunities of success in exams because assessment methodologies measure performance against the same standard.
Could you repeat that?
Of course. So all students have the same opportunities of success in exams because assessment methodologies measure performance against the same standard. Can react.
So can I start to jump in? I see a lot of red crosses, and I agree that school students barely have anywhere the same opportunities when it comes to access to the education system, and especially when it comes to exams. We already heard it from Nathan. Thank you for your very powerful contribution that technological devices are also not only, but also a big inequality, but also with coming to school and having to sit down and like to concentrate for hours, not knowing what the family situation, what the personal situation is like. And it is definitely not an objective assessment of performance, because it can also really depend on how you're feeling this day. If you even had like enough food because maybe you didn't have to eat because you don't have the money. Yes, so to make it short, no.
Thank you. I think today I'm struggling to unmute myself every moment. Francesca, you have your answers. Then in the meantime, I just want to ask all the other people who said no. So we have, I don't know, Hilde, we have Marta, we have Caridad, we have Juliana, Tina. If you would like to come on the panel, just raise your hand. Marta, welcome to the panel. Francesca, I'm giving you the floor, and then Marta will join us.
Thank you. I'd just like to expand on what Alexandra said, and it also touches on the slide that Milos had. I love that image of equity versus equality. And I think that's really something that we need to think about, that standard assessments will often be biased against diverse student groups. So based on things like gender, ethnicity, language, special educational needs as well. So there are ways that we can make summative assessment more inclusive and fair. So for example, by developing and training teachers to use more inclusive teacher assessment practices, reviewing the content and the format of standardized assessment, using a range of assessment formats and tasks. That's what a few of us have touched on in previous questions as well. And also learning how to be a little bit innovative in the assessment process. So I think that there are ways that we can make assessment more equitable and inclusive, that cater to the needs of all students and allow them to shine.
Thank you, Francesca. Marta, the floor is yours. And then I can give it to the rest of the panelists. I'm just trying to be a bit.
Yeah, it's similar to what Alexandra was saying, and it's related to the presentation that Milos shared before, that there was this slide saying that they found a correlation, this study between grades, like good grades and bad grades, and the levels of happiness or stress, so that clearly shows that in that study, it shows that it's not an effective method, because the students that were depressed or that weren't that happy had lower grades. Again, like Milos already said, that we didn't know what like the correlation was, but whatever it is, it shows that, but at least in that study and many others, that they are not effective because of that reason. Like students that are more depressed or sad have lower grades.
Thank you, Marta, for your contribution. Amy, Milos, would you like to share? Thank you, Amy.
No problem. Again, it's terrible, this, because I want to press no and yes for every answer, and you're forcing me to pick one. I guess that's the point. But I think I agree with what's already been said, that these summative assessments can be really detrimental, and particularly to some groups of learners who don't cope well in that sort of high stakes, it's now or never, you pass or fail today, really don't cope well with that. I would say what we also need to think about, though, is that the alternatives sometimes fall down for the same reasons. So where you have formative assessments, you then have teacher bias one way, one direction or the other, that might favour certain groups of pupils or might assume things about certain pupils and their work. So whatever form of assessment we use, we need to be really mindful of that, don't we, and how the system we've set up will privilege certain groups and individuals.
Thank you, Amy. Again, perfectly in time. And while I invite Milos to also reply, if there's anyone else who would like to come in on this issue of opportunities and success in exams, please raise your hand and you can join us. Milos, if you would like to go next.
Yeah, my comment maybe go out a bit out of the statement scope, but it's also related to that exercise we did in the beginning when I was asking you how do you feel when you got a low grade, and everybody was saying sad, disappointed, failure, anxious, I cannot go to my parents. Grades should be seen as a feedback, and when you get a feedback, that's the feedback to your behavior, not to your personality. And we obviously see that grades are affecting students to that level that they can, I don't know, cause bad feelings, or even in case the mental health problems exist, even make them more serious or more deeper. We just need to see assessment and grades as a feedback to what we know and feedback to our behavior. We should not take it personally, and we should not have so much impact on students and on their well-being. And in that way, assessment and the whole procedures will be less stressful for students.
Thank you, Milos. And of course, this is very insightful and interesting how we identify with the grade that we have rather than be able to detach and take it as a feedback, I guess. Might be also because of the way the system is built, as we discussed before. Talking about stress a bit, let me say something here a bit that maybe we can agree, maybe we can disagree with, and I would really like to have some more panelists with us. So I also think I have it so I can type it in the chat because it's a bit long so that everybody can, yes. So if exams did not have important consequences for students' futures, they would not be motivated to do their best in them. And I can imagine this one is a yes, no situation, or is it a sharp yes or sharp no? Some people are very convinced that they don't agree with this statement. What do the people on the panel think? Perfect, Amy. I think you took one for the team, representing the yes part. So please, I will invite you to start, and then we can invite some more people to contribute.
Yeah, again, I could have easily clicked no for that, but I think, yeah, it depends. It depends why we're assessing, doesn't it? And I think I agree with Milos when he said that actually for a lot of assessments, what we need to think about is that this is about a change in your behavior. It's not about a change in your personality or something that's wrong with you. It's about something that you need to do next. But then there are the exams that you sit where it decides which university you're going to get into, or what career you're going to go into, and your grade changes that. So it is high stakes, and some people are really well motivated by that. So in Finland, where only the top 10% of applicants get into teacher training, that exam that they pass, they're highly motivated to get a really good grade in that because they want to be a teacher and they want to get in. So I think that it does motivate them. And for some students, that's a really good motivation. For other students, it will put them off, and it will stop them from trying, I guess, if they don't feel that they're going to make the grade.
Thank you, Amy. We have a new panelist, Alejandra. Do you want to go next, Ale? Sorry, this is the time. I forget to stop it when people stop speaking. Please.
Yes.
floor is yours.
So, well, I'm Alejandra from Sirius. And yeah, for me, it's no. I completely understand your point, Amy, and I think you are right in many senses. I think that is more like the culture that we have built around schools and how it should be, that we need to get good grades because this is gonna make a better future for us, while we should shape it more around we should learn and go to school and study because we want to learn and we want to be a better person, or we want to become professionals and so on. And that way the stress and anxiety that many people get doing exams will reduce. I was getting a lot of anxiety while doing exams, so I can relate to that. So yeah, I think I agree with you because of how the situation is built on, but I think it shouldn't be that way.
Thank you, Alejandra. You can stay with us a bit longer. Francesca, do you have any reactions on this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit of a tough one for me to answer, but I think that motivation in general is quite complex, and it comes down to whether students are intrinsically or extrinsically motivated by school and by what outcomes they're looking for. To be honest, I've done mostly research on teacher motivation, and we see that a lot of teachers show a high degree of intrinsic motivation to enter the profession. So they're not motivated by things like pay, job security. Well, pay in many countries is quite low, so maybe that's not a motivating factor. But I think you see a wide diversity of motivation there, and I would assume that for students it's the same. I mean, if we can share personal experiences, I was the kind of student, whether it was 50% exam, I was always motivated to do my best. So I think it comes down to a little bit what the rest of the panel has been saying about, are we motivated by learning to learn, or for outcome's sakes? Or I think that individual differences will probably play a lot into how students are motivated. I'm sorry, my connection seems unstable, so I hope I'm not cutting out.
You cut off sometimes, but for very short time, so I think we can follow. Again, thank you for being perfectly on time. Everyone is perfectly on time. And Milos, I saw you clapping. Would you like to add something to what Francesca just mentioned?
Yeah, I love the part about mentioning about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So is the motivation within you, and you'll do some things because you like them, or you do extrinsically because you know you will get a new cell phone if you pass the grade with the best grades, or you finish your school with the best grades. I forgot now what I wanted to say, but yeah, it slipped my mind. But yeah, maybe somebody else, so I don't use the time.
Alex.
So I just wanted to say that I agree with many things that are said, especially with Alejandra, that I think that in this education system we are having now, where people go to school often with fear, like even trying to cheat to be better, you know, not because they're lazy, but because they have to succeed. I think this statement may be true, but I personally wish and work for a school where personal growth, where knowledge, where excitement for learning is put first. And I think then this statement would be a no. But I think this is a rocky road until there, maybe. But yeah.
Thank you very much, Alex. And Milos, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, the thought came back to me. If we just compare the formative and summative assessment, and in summative assessment we have the grades, and grades decide about the future university and everything. That's all assessment of learning. But if we use formative assessment as an assessment for learning, and through the assessment we learn things that we need to learn, and we get insights on our knowledge and on what we should focus on, or on what goes good or not good to us, I think that should be the motivation to do the exams of any kind, or assessments of any kind, better to say. It should not be the fact that the grades will affect what we want to study. I mean, we can always find a way to try next year, or I don't know, there is always find a way to end up in the career you want, easier or harder, but that should not be the main motivation to go out and do the best in the exams.
Thank you very much, Milos. And I see Stefan and Mirta wanted to contribute. Stefan and Mirta, do you want to come on?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, one moment. We put on the camera. Yes, thank you very much. So I excuse myself because I didn't follow all the conversation, but I was a little bit in and out. We have been implementing the coordinating the implementation of 2 European projects in the Erasmus Plus, the Friends and Europe, that were experimenting a technique promoting well-being in school, that is Transcendental Meditation. And I want to say the experience about this thing of motivation also and exams. It was very interesting because it was introduced in children and in school from primary school to university to adult education, etc. And there was a class of young children in which they created an happiness meter. And was very interesting because they felt very much, we did the research with it, and there was diminishing of anxiety or depression. And most of the time, as also Milos was mentioning at the beginning, there was also much better school grade and also less dropout. And when they did this happiness meter, and there were some value of what make your day you feel more happy, no one of the children said ever, because I got this present of the other. Most of the question is, or most of the answer was, because I did the right thing that day, because the teacher was very appreciative to me, because my friends did a good thing to me. And I think this shows that real motivation, and this reflects also my personal life. Sorry, I don't know if I take too long, but that the real motivation, as now everyone is coming up of the importance of equity, of inclusiveness in education, of education not for just learning information, but for learning to act in life, to be in life better, more inclusive, more self-confidence, to listen more. It's really this that motivates. And if I can tell just a little personal experience, is that I was very good at school and very good in passing exams. But honestly, I have to say that the main reason why I was very good in passing exam is because I didn't believe in that. So my old way and technique, maybe it's not good to say that, but I have to be honest. My main way and technique was psychological. I knew how to bring people on the thing I knew best.
We need to start wrapping up.
Yes, yes. So just I want to mention this to say that also concerning the previous, I have to say that for me was the motivating the exam as evaluation method. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming up on this. You are very welcome to come back for the next statements. So I'm going to remove our very insightful extra panelists and go for a next statement. And on this one, I would really like to hear also the opinion of some people in the room, maybe someone who has had an experience on this topic or who would like to have an experience on this topic. So students should be allowed to choose how they want to be assessed. So students should be allowed to choose the way that they are assessed. We are collecting some no's, but we also have some yeses. Wow, this is finally a controversial statement. Oh, perfect. So Nathan, welcome. Does anybody else want to come on the panel from the group? I see some yeses. Some yeses there. So if anybody wants to join, please raise your hand and we'll bring you in. Jessica, please join us. If more people want to join, please come on board. So who wants to start with this one? A yes or a no? Last time we started with a yes. So this time we're gonna start with a no. Who has a no? Amy, you have a no. You always speak in the controversial side. No, this time I think there is parity. This time we're even. There is 4-4. So all good, Amy. You're not part of the minority. Please.
Oh, I don't mind being different. I can see there'll be a really good argument for why students should be able to pick the kind of assessment that they want. And I can see from a student perspective, I would really like that, because I would never choose to do an exam ever again. But thinking about my teacher participants and their workload and well-being, I think this could be nightmarish to administer. And also for me, in my context in England, where the profession has been deprofessionalized and there's a lack of respect for the profession, in my opinion, it's another thing that's been chipped away from teachers, I guess, is that actually you're the pedagogue, you know the best way to assess what you've taught and what should be best for your students and what's going to get the best outcomes. To then say, no, the students know better than you, I think for me, it's just another nail in the coffin of teacher professionalism.
Thank you, Amy. Jessica, would you like to come in?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for giving me the word. And Amy, I do understand what you mean indeed, because I think we need to take into account teacher freedom in how they assess and how they teach. At the same time, what we found in our position paper when we were doing research on what well-being means in the context of education and training, we found that choice, giving learners the choice of what they study, how they study, and how they're assessed, greatly contributes to their well-being. So it could be something that is explored, taking into account indeed teachers' workload as well. But I don't think that we need to go for just one form of assessment. And also I think that for the learner, it can kind of help them show them what their strengths are and how they're good, because I think that really often we just don't teach that. And so learners just don't know actually how to do things once they leave education and how to organize themselves and work, for example, and other parts of life. So yeah, I would definitely be pro-choice to a certain extent and with support to educators. Thank you.
Now I could see how this was a very yes-no sort of of position. I think, again, I keep on referring to yesterday's presentation from Michael because it was very interesting. And I think what he mentioned is that I'm going to take a minute also for myself, because he mentioned that in Ireland, no, you have this leaving certificate with a set of written exams, and it couldn't be done during the pandemic because you have to literally sit in a room. And so the first year they changed the whole structure, so it's only based on grades chosen by teachers, and that was really stressful for the teachers. But the next year they made it a sort of choice. So you could either decide to take all of the exams, or you could decide to take one of the exams or two or three and take also the teacher feedback. And that seemed to have an impact on students' well-being because they had a bit more freedom into choosing also what kind of feedback they felt more comfortable. So it was sort of choosing, but with kind of like two options. So it was very much guided. So again, just putting it because it was very insightful presentation. I think I'm a bit mind blown by it. And there were very interesting emojis throughout it. Milos, what would you think about this?
Well, I think that I have three short points. First, if we have all the ways of the assessment standardized, then it should not be that difficult to compare the results. If some student decides to take an exam, but the other one wants to do it through the project, as long as you have them standardized, which might not be the easiest task to do, that might not be the problem. Second, I don't think that we should throw everything on poor teachers and that they should develop all the possible assessment methods. I think that ministries of education or national agencies for assurance of quality or whatever they called in different countries can take over the task from the teachers, and that they can help them to be able to offer different assessment opportunities to students. And while I was listening, an example came to my mind. For example, if we have a visually impaired student who goes to regular school, and I'm using this because I don't like regular normal roles, that student cannot use the pen and paper test. So for that student, it's made an exception. So why we cannot make exceptions for all the other students? So it's just the question of the goodwill and investing more time. And I will repeat once again, it's not the job of the poor teachers. They already are overwhelmed with all the things that they have to do. So some other instance can take over their task and help them in that process.
Thank you, Milos, for reminding us of the importance of actually education reforms in this regard. So it's not to dump everything on the institutions themselves, but actually include the other actors. I'm going to give the floor to Alex, and then Nathan, you can come in
Yeah, I think education reforms is a very important and good point. Also, Jessica wrote it in the chat, and I just want to emphasize the importance of including school students, because we're the biggest mass in the school systems, but we are not asked, you know, how should assessment look like, also in the general structure, but also not on the individual in the classroom. So I very much agree with Jessica and Miller's statements.
Thank you, Alex. Nathan. And then Francesca, I don't know if you wanted to come in, but if you do, please feel free after the.
Yes, I think most of those things have been said, but it's a difficult question because I don't think we should like make it normal that students can choose the assessment methods, but having assessment methods that suits to each student could be like really more equal for everyone, because everyone and each student has different capacities and different intelligence. And so with standard assessment methods, we are not able to give them like a real appreciation on how good they are or not on different topics, and I think it also depends on which formation and age, because there is like for vocational formation, we have sometimes very specific things we have to know, and if we don't know them, we just can't improvise or create new assessment method.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for bringing in two very important elements. One, if we involved, and that Alex also brought in, if we involve students into creating assessment methods, we don't need everyone to choose, because we would be participating in what they would look like. And secondly, the aspect of vocational education and training, which is, I suppose, an area of assessment that we would need to look even further into, because there is a lot more formative assessment in there. I think we can learn a lot from the vocational education and training sector. But let me move to the next statement. Francesca, I hope you don't take it. I don't know if you came in. I'm a bit now. I'm sorry. I didn't tell you in the beginning of this panel, but I'm having a personal drama with the delivery of my fridge in the meantime. So I am trying to liberate some brain space for this. So sometimes if you see me looking somewhere else, is me trying to coordinate with my non-French speaking parents that need to take this fridge. So let me go with the next statement, which is one that I would also, again, I don't know if it's going to be a controversial one or not, but I look forward to hearing some of your thoughts. So my next statement is standardized assessment, standardized testing makes students sick. I can. Oh no, Amy, the perks of being remotely participating into things. I can see that this one is there is some sort of an agreement on this. Can I hear someone who believes that standardized testing doesn't make students sick?
I think from my perspective, it's a bit of a gray zone. I think saying that standardized assessment causes sickness is quite a strong statement. I think that saying that children might feel pressure to excel, especially those with perfectionist tendencies, or who have lots of pressure at home, but to say that standardized assessment makes kids sick, I think maybe is a step too far. And again, referring back to the keynote presentation, a lot of what we know at the moment in terms of mental health in school is correlational. So we really need more longitudinal work, maybe experimental work, which might be difficult, but we need to see in which direction the causality goes. So is it that the depressed students are doing more poorly in school, or that because students are doing more poorly in school, then they're depressed. So we don't know which way the cause and effect goes. And I can imagine also, I mean, things like mental illness are so, it depends on so many factors, not just school. So I think that we need to be taking a more holistic view of sickness and mental ill-being. And I would not agree that standardized testing causes students to be sick, but that it could exacerbate sickness in certain student populations. And especially for kids who are more likely to feel more pressure at home from themselves or based on their education system. I mean, in Canada, or in Ontario, at least, we didn't have high stakes testing to leave, or to leave school. So we didn't have this sort of SAT or the baccalaureate or the matric in South Africa, for example. So I think, yeah, it's a more complex answer than just school or assessment makes kids sick.
Thank you, Francesca. Indeed, it's a complex matter. I think we were trying to make a very provocative statement. Can I hear some people who believe that standardized testing makes students sick? And again, if anybody wants to come in, please, we have a Gilda that wants to come in. Please, if anybody wants to start, I'm gonna ask. Go, Milos.
I would be very short. So I completely agree with what Francesca said. We don't know what is the cause and what is the consequence. But I want to just give one personal, I think, example of everybody. Whenever we have exam, we always sweat a lot, or we have digestive problems, or we don't want to eat, or we overdrink coffee. So it's not really sick in the word of being sick and stuck in bed for 7 days, but it does cause some physiological reactions of your body. It's not illness, it's not sickness, it's not any kind of pathological thing, but it has an effect on your body. And if the school was a stress-free environment, that wouldn't have happened. And I have another example that just came to my mind. When I had mathematics exams, I met my professor of psychology in high school, and she told me, "Oh, well, you don't seem to be stressed." And I was like, "No, I'm not." And she was like, "Well, you just stress about the things that are important for you. So if you don't care so much about your exam, then you don't invest so much yourself and so much of your stress." So yeah, just a few short examples.
Very good examples. Like for a very long time, I didn't think there was a correlation between me being sick every time I had an exam and the exam happening. But then I realized there actually was a sort of correlation between the two things. Gilda, do you want to come in? You were in the nose.
Yes, I was in the nose. I mean, not in the nose, in the no. But mine is a no with reservations, in the sense that it really is not so much for me about assessments, but what about assessments do to education in general. And so how sort of, so in that sense, it's not the assessment or the final exams or a student going that makes a student sick, but it is the way in which assessment sometimes can also condition the way that the learning is done. And so that impact that is not maybe, at the end of the term or at the end of the year, but it's really an everyday reality of, I remember, I mean, I left school almost 10 years ago now, but there's one thing that from what I understand hasn't changed a lot, that sometimes there is a tendency to teach just so that the students can pass the exam. And that means that, everything from the class format to the kind of homework that students are given, or to the kind of mock test, everything sort of replicates the exams. And then, so in that sense, it's not so much about the final assessment, but it's more about what happens between when students enter the classroom and leave the classroom, and what is the impact on exams on that. So it is a no, but also a yes. I don't know, maybe too vague.
Thank you, Gilda. And thank you, Amy, also for your comment in the chat. It is true. Now I am sweating. I was really cold. Now I'm really hot. Then I was really cold. Then I was really hot. So of course, this doesn't mean that they shouldn't be happening. Would you care to elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, again, I agree with everything that everybody said on both sides. I think there are learners who do get genuinely sick thinking about the pressure of going into an exam. And I have students who equally get sick at the thought of giving a presentation instead of doing an exam, or being observed because they're teacher trainees, and that makes them feel sick and makes some of them genuinely anxious and exacerbates their mental illness. I wouldn't say it makes them mentally ill, but if they're already mentally ill, it can make it worse. But I think at the same time, a lot of the things when we're learning and we're pushing ourselves out of that comfort zone, sometimes that is uncomfortable, and sometimes you do have a physical reaction to it, don't you? So I wouldn't necessarily say that you should shy away from what you're doing every time that happens, because sometimes it's just a sign that you're doing something daunting, but you can do it.
Thank you. And it's true, there are many other more non-formal, for example, ways of evaluating performance that are not necessarily easiest, because the point is in the end also what competence you learn at school, right? You maybe don't learn to speak in public or feel confident, or maybe you know, there's so many things to it, I guess, that it's not as easy as it seems to just say like, let's move away to something else that maybe makes people more comfortable. Alex, would you like to come in on this issue?
Yes, for me, I always think about when the first time I was scared to go to school because of an exam. And when I think about this, it happened really, really early. I think like when we talk about secondary school students, it's not that it's better, you know, but this pressure starts from a very early age. And I don't think that should be normal. I don't think that it should be normal that people go to school feeling anxious. I get, of course, the example, and I smiled in my head and was like, yeah, it's kind of true. But from what I heard from my peers, is like, it's not only having tummy sick, but it's also throwing up. It's like really extreme, like hair loss, like the things that also not only mentally, but also physically show. And the education system I wish for should look different.
Thank you, Alex. We're going to pass on the floor to Jessica, and then I would suggest we wrap up, not slap up, wrap up.
Thank you very much, Pina. I think when we talk about assessments, we need to unpack some things, because quite often we're not saying that assessments shouldn't happen and that feeling a bit of stress or worry about public speaking or needing to perform is something that you shouldn't go through. I think it's actually important to have these experiences, but you need to be guided. And the problem is that students are not guided, they're not supported. They often don't know what to expect, they don't know how to deal with what they feel, and they don't know how to express what they're feeling. And from my experience at school, in secondary school in the UK, a lot of girls actually got into eating disorders because of exams. Either maybe they already had them and they got exacerbated, or maybe they started then, but the fear and anxiety that sort of closes off your stomach, I found that was very common amongst my classmates. So I don't think we need to diminish the possible impacts. And of course, we're not always talking about everyone. Sometimes we are talking just about some people, but it's really important that we do take care of those people as well. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Jess, thank you very much, Gilda. I'm going to now try to wrap this up. If that is okay with you, I would like to ask you all like a very last more individualized question / statement, if that's fine. I'm going to start with Milos, if that is okay with you. Many times there is a talk that the way to solve the epidemic of young people being having mental health problems is as easy as putting psychologists and therapists into school. Do you think this is the way forward? How do you think this can be implemented? And just some closing remarks on these issues of support to students in schools.
I don't think it's the only solution, but I think that's the very important first step, because I was recently investigating about the number of psychologists and psychiatrists available in different countries, and I was using the UN source of data, so that doesn't matter are they EU or non-EU, and I realized that the shortage of staff is huge. So I think by putting more psychologists and psychotherapists in school, that's going to help the solution. On the other side, we need to do two more things. First, we need to train teachers or help them to better catch the first signals, and then they can serve as a reference because you cannot expect that all the students will pass through psychologist office in one school year. And the second thing, we need to be aware that some people are not aware about their problems, so they might have resistance. So the voluntary acceptance to see a mental health professional is important, because if you have resistance in therapy, then the therapy won't go very far. So to go back to your question, yes, it's important first step, but that's not going to solve it, because if you put those people in the room, but in the schools, but nobody goes to see them, the problem is still there.
Thank you very much, Milos, for this answer and contribution. Amy, there are some research that suggests that 47% of educators in the EU report that they feel quite or a lot stressed at work. So how is this for educators? What can be done for educators in training and during the profession to make sure that they are also well? And do you think we can teach well-being?
That's a huge question. That's a huge question. I wish I had the answers to that, how to make teachers well, because they're not. In many countries, many areas of the world, teachers are not okay, and they're leaving the profession in droves, in their thousands. So it's a massive problem. I don't think, my personal opinion is that it's not down to the individual to maintain their own well-being, or to fix their problems with their workload, or to identify their own issues and raise them. I think it's a systemic issue, and I think the more that we make the individual responsible, the more we're letting off the people who could actually do something about it, who will continue to say, oh, you need to do some meditation, or oh, you need to go and see a counsellor, oh, you need to be a bit smarter about using your time. Actually, it's up to leaders and governments to say, no, teachers aren't going to do that work anymore. So here in England, just thinking about what Milos was saying there about teachers identifying wellbeing issues in children, I agree, teachers are really good at doing that and are best placed to do it. Here in England, teachers are responsible for spotting signs of abuse, for spotting potential terrorism, for spotting welfare issues, for now spotting mental health and wellbeing problems that are coming up, and can be sent to prison if they don't identify those problems. Now, to me, that's just completely crazy, when we've got teachers who can't cope with stress and their workload and the pressure that's put on them, to make the individual more responsible, legally responsible for doing those things, when their leaders don't have the same responsibility to them to look after them. So that's not a very good answer, but I think governments need to be held to account and need to look after their teachers rather than teachers looking after themselves.
Of course it is, and I mean also what Gilda was mentioning in the chat, it can be paralyzing to know that you're the only person responsible for your own well-being, considering also sometimes the working conditions that you're in. Teachers in all levels of education are underpaid, overworked, over-responsibilized, and a lot more. So of course, that was actually very insightful, and it answers a bit my question. So thank you very much. I mean, I know I asked you an impossible one. I'm going to go to Francesca, and I hope it's okay to ask you this. If not, I can change it, of course. The USAID is most famous in the student movement for the PISA test, which is something, as you know, it's very controversial and not always very welcome by the school student movement, in its sense that it has many shortcomings, many things that we think, are not necessarily fit to evaluate the student as a whole in a holistic way. So rather my question would be, do you think that PISA is a tool, can innovate and can evaluate well-being, and how can PISA be a tool to promote well-being? And I'm sorry, this is a very tough one, so you can take it as light as you want.
No. And so just to preface this, I do not work on PISA, so hopefully I'm not speaking out of line on anything here. I think that PISA with any kind of international research or assessment. So just going to say that first. But I think that PISA gives us some really interesting into the 15-year-olds around participating countries and economies. And I think it's a really useful indication of what students know, how they can apply it. And in terms of well-being, not directly pertaining to the PISA assessment that children might be stressed when they take the assessment, but PISA does collect a number of indicators that are relevant to well-being. So looking at things like bullying, student-teacher relations, things like this that are all essential to student well-being. So if a student goes to school and is bullied, that could potentially have a very different, a bigger or a smaller impact on student well-being than anxiety over assessment. So I think while it doesn't necessarily give a holistic view of well-being of students, I think it gives us some really good indications of different factors of well-being that education systems can work on. Something that I personally am working on quite in depth at the moment is looking at cyberbullying, which generally happens outside of schools. But we know that it's highly correlated with school bullying. So if we know based on PISA that there are differences between schools or within schools with regards to who's being bullied and how they're being bullied, then countries can look at how they can develop certain policies, practices, programs to address bullying, which could also then address cyberbullying, which is very related to student well-being. So while yes, it's an assessment and might cause some stress and anxiety for students, I think it gives us some really important indications of other aspects of student well-being.
Thank you very much, Francesca. And we actually look forward to cooperating more with the OECD more generally as school students to develop, for example, to participate in interesting debates around cyberbullying and how we can minimize it, bullying in schools, but also maybe in the future, looking long-term, revising PISA with the school student perspective. Hopefully, we will at some point reach that point. And on this school student perspective, I'm going to give the floor to Alex. Alex, my question for you is, what are your 3 or whatever number of priorities for school students in rethinking assessment for well-being?
Okay. So I will start with 3.1, and I hope that I have the most important ones. For me, of course, as a school student representative, it is listen to school students, listen to their opinions and needs, and please take them into account, because mental health was also an issue or like a topic before the pandemic, but it wasn't fully realized. It was like, yeah, they exaggerate and stuff. But we really want to have a seat on the decision-making table, but because we also know what school students affect, maybe not always from a data side, but from a personal insight. And this is also very important. The second part, it was raised earlier, mental health support isn't everything, but it for sure is very, very important in schools, because I also see, when I remember teachers struggling because they had to be everything. They had to be administrator, educator, sometimes also mental health support. And I think that it's really important to have like people to go to in school where you can get support for free. And this is not the only thing that I want to say in the second demand, but also that mental health education is somehow a part of national curricula, that we talk about this in schools, that we learn how to deal with that we know how to express ourselves. It was raised earlier. And now finally, a big one, I think we talked about this a lot. Is assessment really the problem, or is it like our education system is built? Maybe it is. So I wish for a socially just, democratic and anxiety-free school, but also society. And a little step there is like us coming together and raising demands, and hopefully that they are also implemented.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you very much, everyone. While I try to wrap this up in like literally a minute, I would like to ask people that have been following today to maybe raise your hand or type in the chat your main takeaway from today. I think it's very important that we try to wrap it up together, as we've been through this together, and in the spirit of cooperation, which we always love. I think to wrap this discussion up, there has been so much and so many new angles to the discussion and new things that maybe we hadn't thought about, that maybe we need a bit more time to reflect on the outcomes of today's discussion. But I think what we can all agree on is that assessment is not necessarily the problem itself. The problem is system and system change that is required, and it is required in terms of having educational structure, educational reforms, and funding dedicated to education training and teacher training to be able to rethink assessment holistically. That we do need these reforms to be done together with all the actors of the school. So teachers, students, principals, parents, anyone who really is part of the school environment and of education of each and every individual. And that we need to do this together because we need to make sure that nobody is left behind, and that we don't put at the margins those who are already, that we don't push them even more at the margin, because the pandemic has also put those who were towards the center at the margin and put those who were at the margin even more at the margin on society. So we now need to rethink ways to re-involve everyone in the schools and in society more in general. That to do this, we maybe need to move to a more outcome-based evaluation rather than necessarily notion-based, that we need to support students and teachers throughout their learning path and their daily lives in the stressful school experiences, and that we do need to learn to identify our mental health concerns to be able to act upon them, and that for this we need the support, structural support of education ministers, governments, and really of more powerful people than our own, because it is not only an individual responsibility, it is a collective one, and it is not collectively only of the school, but it's collectively of the whole society. And so for this, we do need to rethink assessment. We do have a lot on our plate, and I do hope that we can continue to cooperate together. I have really enjoyed the discussion. I really very thankful to Amy, Milos, Francesca, and Alexandra for being here with us today. I hope you have enjoyed hearing different points of views and maybe thought something new. Thank you very much, Marta, for sharing your insight. It was really insightful to listen to all these professional and different perspectives, but it was also insightful to listen to all of you, really, who came onto the panel. We had a lot of panelists today, and that makes me really happy. So thank you very much for being with us today. If you want to follow up, please read the COVID-19 research report from OBESU and the Lifelong Learning Platform position paper on rethinking assessment. We look forward to being in touch with you. You do know how to find us. The LLLP website is an easy one, same for the OBESU one, and we really look forward to following up with all of you. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Ciao.